The video game industry loves hyperbole. Sure, all entertainment does, but gaming especially seems to get well excited about shouting and screaming as loud as it possibly can. The problem with that is you can get carried away. You've got a great idea and know that potentially have a product that's going to blow the audience's mind when it's released, but that doesn't mean you just start to exaggerate so greatly you disappoint people when push comes to shove. It's not cool, and you should be ashamed. We all got ready for nothing. I'm Simon from What Culture, and this is 10 games that ruined their own potential. Number 10, Assassin's Creed. Man, Assassin's Creed. After months of marketing hype and the constant idea from Ubisoft that this was going to be the ultimate assassin simulator, made even better thanks to a historical setting, everyone, including me, was ready. So ready, in fact. And then it was released. While it did look great, the game itself was the same thing repeated for 12 hours. Almost every mission was the same. And even though it did get you to pull off an assassination here and there, you were mostly dragging yourself through nonsense. Boring nonsense at that. And the end boss was terrible. Ubisoft knew this too, because the sequel magically fixed all of these wrongs. Still, what a disappointment. Number 9, Beyond Two Souls. Developer David Cage's track record is most definitely up and down. Fahrenheit, or Indigo Prophecy, was a game of two halves, the first half being brilliant and the second half being terrible, and featuring necrophilia. Then there was Heavy Rain, which was mostly all incredible, and finally, we had Beyond Two Souls, which sucked harder than a vacuum cleaner. Having one of the most nonsensical stories you'll ever experience, none of it made any sense, and the game was horrible to play. It featured all of Cage's usual move the stick to replicate the movements of an actual person setup, but it was so audacious that it never even had the chance to be entertaining. It was great that Willem Dafoe and Ellen Page had agreed to be in it. That just gave Beyond Two Souls some weight, but no one cared about that an hour after starting it. They were just reaching for the off button, because it was not good. Number 8, Aliens Colonial Marines. Aliens Colonial Marines didn't ruin its own potential. It more just lied to everyone about what it actually was. Probably not the best idea when you're dealing with a beloved movie franchise. For starters, although Gearbox Studios were keen to tell everyone they were working on the game, they weren't. They had decided to focus on Borderlands instead and just outsourced Aliens and hoped nobody would notice. Of course, people did notice, mainly because the end product was awful. It looked old, it was riddled with bugs, cutscenes were laughable, and it was so easy to complete it was like someone had just forgotten to put difficulty into the game. And it was dirt short, so you felt ripped off at the end too. It was a mismanaged mess that still leaves a bad taste in people's mouths, and for good reason. This was not cool. Number 7, Daikatana. Daikatana ticked all the boxes on paper. It was the latest game from John Romero, the legend behind Wolfenstein 3D, Doom and Quake. Had a poster that Romero was about to make you his bitch, which is awful when we look back on it now. And it had plenty of pre-release coverage saying this was going to change everybody's lives for the better. And it didn't. At all. For anyone. Seemingly thinking he could do no wrong, Romero pushed his development team so hard they couldn't get anything done. This led to missed deadlines and Daikatana's visuals taking a huge hit. Just to make matters worse, the game then switched engines, which caused further delays and meant when it was released, it felt ridiculously old. Plus it was frustrating to play and barely any fun. It was a massive flop and a failure, and now exists solely in lists like this, where we can give it the kicking it deserves. Number 6, Metroid Other M. Given that the Metroid series is almost nothing more than a dream at this point, you can imagine how pumped up people were for Other M in 2010. It'd been 3 years since Metroid Prime 3 had been released, so now everyone who even knew about Samus Aran wanted a follow-up, especially as Nintendo had given the reins here to develop a Team Ninja to try and spice things up a bit. It's not like Other M was bad either. It wasn't. It was just fine. It controlled well and had enjoyable combat, but Team Ninja was so focused on the story that you could barely go 5 minutes without the game kicking you off to the side for another cutscene. It was quite the departure for a franchise that had prided itself on telling stories through the gameplay. It also negated Samus somewhat. A tough heroine beforehand, she felt more meek and mild here, which is something nobody wanted. Most Metroid fans want to forget about this entry, and you can kind of see why. It just wasn't what it should have been. Number 5, The Matrix Online. In the mid-2000s, World of Warcraft had taken over the world, so it stood to reason other developers would follow suit. When it was revealed The Matrix, of all things, was going to try and bite into this MMORPG market, well, that just made a lot of sense, especially with so many story threads to wrap up from the movies. But boy, we should have known better. Despite all the promises from Monolith Productions, hardly any were delivered on. Sure, the graphics and sounds made it feel like you were living in the Matrix universe, but the plot was rubbish and the game itself utterly generic. It's like I made it, and I have no knowledge of anything. can barely butter a piece of toast. Seemingly everyone clocked onto this because the servers were hardly populated at all. This often felt like some weird fan-sourced project as opposed to the real deal. Unsurprisingly, after 4 years it was shot in the head and left to die, and now no one cares, although they didn't then either. Number 4, Superman 64. No one in the history of video games had ever got Superman right. It shouldn't be that hard when you think about it. Just make me a really empowered massive guy and let me do whatever I want. So, when Superman 64 was announced, this is when everyone thought that was going to change. Finally, somebody was going to get it right and we would get the Man of Steel experience we deserved. But we didn't get that. Instead, we got one of the worst games ever made. Aside from the storyline being dull, the graphics awful, and a so-called kryptonite fog that was used to excuse the game's poor draw distance, all you did was fly through rings. In no comic did Superman just fly through rings for an eternity, and yet in Superman 64, that's all you did, and you did that while the game stopped working and occasionally just bugged out. Number 3, SimCity. SimCity was great. Did you ever play the NES version where the cool professor guy with the big moustache walked you through it? It was wonderful. The PC iteration was even better still. That's why when in 2013 EA said it was time for the series to make its big comeback, everyone was well excited. We were all ready to get back to building, especially as this was a new engine and that the franchise had rarely disappointed. It was a lock for success. Even though it wasn't, and we were all fools. Deciding that SimCity had to have a persistent online connection, EA and Maxis botched the launch entirely. When I say botched, I mean people who had paid money to play the game couldn't, and those that could found their saves being deleted, having to deal with crashes, or just an assault of in-game bugs. Everyone was legitimately outraged, and an update so you didn't have to play online took a year to appear. By that point, it'd been hacked anyway, so you either broke the law or sat around twiddling your thumbs to make sure you kept your record clean. It's a huge shame because it was a decent game if you could play it, but no one could. Number 2, Dead Island. Dead Island is a weird one because the developers basically tricked everyone with an advert. While it wasn't a bad game, it wasn't a very good one either, the trailer released before launch suggested this was going to focus on character depth and emotion, not just be an out-and-out zombie smash-a-thon. Have a guess which one it actually was. That's right, the end result was just another undead outing where you equipped weapons before chopping people's heads off, and any ideas of connecting with the individuals on screen was nowhere to be seen. Then there were those repetitive missions, and trying to get through the entire thing was hard work. In hindsight, we all learned a valuable lesson. Don't trust trailers, they're probably just lies. Number 1, Watch Dogs. The rule of thumb when it comes to Ubisoft games is usually that they'll get it right on round 2. So take whatever comes out first with a pinch of salt, and then wait for the sequel. That was the case with Watch Dogs as well. From the moment it debuted at E3 2012, everyone dubbed it in the same category as a GTA. It was an experience where you could hack anything and take charge of a lovely looking open world. Fortunately, when it arrived in its actual form, there was one glaring issue. It looked nothing like it had done beforehand. While Watch Dogs still looked pretty enough, it emerged that the whole game had been downgraded so it could actually run on consoles. That was bad, sure, but the knockout blow came when you played the thing. You couldn't hack to your heart's content and were kind of held back in that regard. The plot was more generic than a Michael Bay movie, and it basically felt like Assassin's Creed, but in a modern setting. It's not bad, but given the hype and expectation, it was a major letdown that still makes gamers mad today. It's pretty good going considering it came out in 2014. Know of any other games that didn't live up to their potential? Let us know in the comments below, and then don't forget to like, share and subscribe. You can even come follow me on Twitter at SimonMiller316. I'm Simon from What Culture, and I will talk to you again very soon.